gold content is low and business is slow. I can give you $50 for it, cash.
$50? That's not really what I was expecting, but I guess I don't have a choice.
Frank Walsh had bought 1,000 things he didn't need over the years. Broken radios, rusted tools, things nobody else wanted. But he'd never once bought something a person couldn't afford to lose. 2 hours earlier, Margaret Ellis had stood in front of the counter at First City Pawn, her hands shaking as she set her wedding ring down on the glass. The man behind the counter, a heavy-set guy with a gold chain and a bored expression, barely glanced at it before pushing it back toward her with 2 fingers. "Plating's worn through," he said flatly. $40. Take it or leave it." $40? "Sir, this is real gold. My husband bought it in—" "Lady, I've got a line behind you." He didn't even look up. 40. That's generous, honestly, given the condition. She'd stood there, humiliated, aware of the 2 men behind her smirking at the exchange, and finally scooped the ring back into her palm and walked out without a word, her face burning. $40 wasn't going to save anything. She needed 230, and she needed it in 4 days, and the one man who was supposed to look at her like she still mattered had looked at her like she was an inconvenience. That's how she ended up outside Walsh Salvage at closing time, standing at a gate she'd only ever driven past. The bell rattled. Frank turned from locking up to see her there, maybe 60, wrapped in a cardigan too thin for the evening chill, the ring clutched so tight in her fist her knuckles had gone pale. "I'm sorry to bother you this late," she said, voice trembling. "I saw your sign. You buy gold, don't you?" Frank studied her the way he studied everything that came through his gate, past the surface, for what was actually wrong underneath. Her coat was thin, her shoes were worn through at the heel, and there was a rawness in her eyes that told him she'd already been turned away from somewhere else that day, and it hadn't gone kindly. "I buy some gold," he said carefully. "But why don't you come in first? It's cold, and you look like you've had a hard afternoon. I don't need sympathy, Mr. Walsh. Frank Walsh. And I'm not offering sympathy, Margaret Ellis. I'm offering coffee. There's a difference." She blinked, surprised he somehow already seemed to know her name was Margaret, though she hadn't said it. A guess, really, an old habit of his, reading people the way he read machines. She followed him inside anyway. In the little tin-roofed office, surrounded by yellowed invoices and old tools, Frank poured 2 cups from a pot that had been sitting since morning and didn't ask if she wanted one before he set it down. "Tell me, what happened today?" he said. "All of it, not just the ring. It came out slowly at first, then all at once. The pawnbroker's sneer, the $40, the mortgage payment due Friday, the medical bills from her husband Robert's final months that never seemed to stop arriving even though he'd been gone since March. 41 years married, and she was down to bargaining with a stranger over the one thing she had left of him. If you believe kindness still exists in this world, the kind that doesn't sneer at you across a counter, take a moment to hit that like button right now, because what Frank found next is the whole reason this story matters. Frank listened without interrupting, and when she finally stopped, wiping her eyes, embarrassed, he set his coffee down and went quiet for a long moment. Then he stood, walked to a locked cabinet in the corner of the office and pulled out an old cedar box, dusty, tied shut with twine. "Ellis," he said slowly. "Your husband, his name was Robert, lived over on Miller Street before the family. Moved him into assisted care a few years back?" Margaret went pale. "How could you possibly know that?" "Because 6 years ago, a moving company cleared out a storage unit on Miller Street that never got picked up. Owner never came back for it, never paid the fees. I bought the contents sight unseen, like I do sometimes. Most of it was junk. This wasn't." He set the box in front of her. Her hands trembled as she untied the twine and lifted the lid. And there, wrapped in an old handkerchief, were dozens of letters in her husband's handwriting, photographs she'd thought were lost forever in the move, and tucked at the very bottom, an envelope with 3 savings bonds inside, bought decades ago and forgotten, now worth just over $400 matured. Margaret sat frozen, one hand pressed to her, mouth tears falling freely now, not the humiliated tears from the pawn shop, but something else entirely. I've had this box sitting in that cabinet for 6 years, Frank said quietly. Never knew whose it was. Didn't feel right selling off somebody's letters for scrap. Figured someday the right person would walk through that gate. Why would you keep something so long not knowing? Frank looked down at his own weathered hands. Because some things aren't junk just because nobody's come to claim them yet. Margaret held the letters to her chest like she was holding Robert, himself, and for the first time since March, she wasn't crying from loss. She was crying from being found. She never did sell the ring. She still wears it today, and every few weeks she stops by Walsh Salvage, not to sell anything, just to bring Frank a coffee and sit for a while in the office that gave her husband's voice back to her when she thought it was gone for good. Some men fix cars. Frank fixes the things people thought were gone forever. If you believe in kindness and humanity, take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to Kindness Tales Stories for more real stories of hidden kindness just like this one. What would you have done in Frank's place? Let us know in the comments below. And remember, sometimes what looks like junk to the world is somebody's whole heart.